WFAN is in the building on this edition of Orange and Blue Bloods. I am EJ Stewart. This is a great show we have for you guys today. Tommy is out this week, but we have a very, very special guest. Anthony Gallo from WFAN will be joining me on the podcast. I'll give him a formal introduction in a minute. We're going to be talking plain Knicks. He's a huge Knicks fan. He's a guy I've been wanting to get on this podcast for a while, so I'm happy to have him jump on. So we'll be talking about some of his early memories of both joy and pain as a Knicks fan. I think that tells a lot about people when you ask them about that. We'll also get into some early win projections for the Knicks. Interesting numbers coming down from ESPN. I'm curious what my guy Gallo has to say about that. And we are recording this podcast on 8/24. It is Kobe Bryant Day. Of course, August 23rd was Kobe Bryant's birthday. I thought the best way to honor Kobe Bryant would be to kind of talk about his legacy in relation to the Knicks. He has some pretty memorable and pretty big moments at Madison Square Garden or related to the New York Knicks. So I want to talk to Gallo about that as well. So all of that is coming at you right after this.
If your blood runs orange and blue, this is the pod for you. You're listening to Orange and Blue Bloods, hosted by EJ Stewart and Tommy Beer. Let's get to it, New York.
So, like I said, you've seen and heard him on WFAN Boomer and Geo. He's an absolute diehard Knicks fan, and our conversations on the Knicks quite often have reverberated through the halls of the station, probably annoyingly amongst other people who, of course, work at WFAN. And especially due to his booming voice. People talk about my voice being deep. Wait till you hear Anthony Gallo. He is one of the most beloved members of the staff at WFAN. He is a good friend of mine. Allow me to welcome a special guest on today's show. WFAN digital team member Anthony Gallo joins Orange and Blue Bloods. Gallo, what's up, homie?
What's good, dude? That was super nice. Thank you, bro. No, I'm excited. We've been trying to do this for a minute, and anytime I can talk about the Knicks at length without being judged, I'm always in for it. So I'm pumped, dude. And to talk about Kobe because we are both the same age, so that hits us right
exactly.
in the feels.
Yeah, this is a safe space because sometimes I'll be honest, and you probably could agree when it comes to being especially optimistic about the Knicks. The fan sometimes isn't always the safest space. You know, you got anybody willing to come around the corner and be like, Knicks suck. Stop talking about the Knicks.
I've been called the propagandist.
So in many ways, I feel like this is like the perfect setup and the perfect spot for us to have a true conversation, a true safe space within the WFAN family to discuss the Knicks this season. And we're going to get to what's going to happen this season and some of your thoughts. But I think and before I continue, of course, this is Orange and Blue Bloods, New York Knicks podcast. You can get this podcast wherever you get your podcasts, including the free Audacy app. Make sure you get the auto download feature on your streaming service. Get these episodes every time you drop. Also, be sure to check us out on YouTube. So those who have not seen Anthony Gallo, who's made appearances on CBS Sports Network, so you've probably seen his face more than I have probably. Make sure you check us out on YouTube. You can find the full episode and clips from the episode on the WFAN YouTube channel. So Gallo, I think in many ways when I like to talk to Knicks fans or introduce Knicks people to the podcast, I think a great tell for an audience to say, what is this guy about? What is his age? Who is he as a Knicks fan? I think the best way to do that off jump is to ask simply, when you think about your most memorable moments, your greatest moments as a Knicks fan, both in joy and in pain, which are the two moments you would stick out to you and say, yeah, those are the ones I think about the most as a fan still?
Well, I think there's not a lot of joy. We're 31 years old. There's not a lot of joy.
Exactly.
We'll start with the good. I think my earliest memory, and I'm not going to act like I was locked in, but my earliest memory is the LJ 4-point play. 100%. I probably am not a Knicks fan if that doesn't happen. Anything could have happened at that point. Nets, Spurs, anything. But that had me locked in. He was my favorite player growing up at that point. So it was monumental. And you know this. I'm a big Melo guy. And this is such I hate to you point this as a moment of joy, as like a big moment of joy. But Easter Day, Melo, Bulls.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. And there's not much. I mean, like, most of my memories are meaningless games, but to me that was a special moment. They were very good that year, and not to discredit the last 2 out of 3 years, but there wasn't like a moment I could pinpoint with Brunson or Randall that I would say is like a monumental moment. So those are my two biggest. And then
quickly on the joy, it's funny you mentioned the LJ play because I feel like when I ask a lot of Knicks fans of our age group, they run to that. And it's interesting to me because it's a play I remember like it was yesterday. Again, that whole playoffs I remember very well because I talked about it on the podcast. Like a lot of it was like me going crazy, my dad being at work, and me being excited to tell him when he came home like what happened, though he had already heard it on the radio at his job. But like still like that. So that play, I remember deeply as well. But like I always, for me, and I said it on the show, like it's the one Knicks picture that hangs in my apartment. It is I think about the Allen Houston shot against Miami, and that
That's a
game
good
5
one.
shot. And to me, like it's funny that I think most Knicks fans, though, I think they side with you. They run to the 4-point play. I think for me, because it was so close to the finals loss, it almost like lessened it for me in my head. Because I feel like at that time, maybe I would say LJ's 4-point play because it was on the way to the Knicks making the NBA Finals. But I guess to me, I think of like, oh yeah, that was a big game to get us to the finals, and then we got stomped by San Antonio.
Yeah. Well, that Knicks team deceivingly was an 8 seed, but it was a short season. They probably are
Yeah,
not an 8 seed on a full
right,
season. I think it's because of it's my earliest memory. And
right,
it almost feels like because you forget how good they were for that 3-year span, even after the LJ play.
right.
And it feels so far and apart from the Allen Houston, what did they go to the Eastern Conference Finals the next year or 2 years after that? So
Yeah,
it felt far and wide apart. And then, I mean, in college, after going through those bad years, that Melo play stuck with me, and that's probably the one I put up there the most, just because it
right.
felt like I could fully appreciate it. I was an adult, we
Yeah,
were out watching the games in the city every game we watched in the city, because we couldn't afford to get into the Garden, but.
of course. Yeah, as you can see the tickets now. I was
Yeah,
talking to
well,
my
I
girlfriend before
still
the
can't afford to
podcast.
get into
I know,
the
yeah. And I
Garden.
was talking, and I saw the tickets, and there are some NBA teams where you could literally watch every home game for the team for the cost of one Knicks ticket on Christmas Day or one
Yeah.
Knicks ticket on opening night against the Celtics this season. I'm here with WFAN's Anthony Gallo here on Orange and Blue Bloods. So we had the positive part, and I'm glad you mentioned the Melo thing because I've talked about that a bunch on the podcast as well.
Mhm.
That being maybe my favorite Carmelo Anthony moment as a Knick. Now the pain, which I know for Knicks fans,
So
there's
many.
plenty. There's plenty, but if you had to pin it to one, what would it be?
I'm gonna keep it to a game and not draft
Okay,
night or trades.
right.
But again, sticking with Melo getting blocked
Oh
against
yeah,
Roy Hibbert, and not that we were gonna win a title. It just felt like that was the best team that we've had, and we should have went farther than they went. So
yeah,
that sticks with me the most. And I guess one of those devastating losses with the Allen Houston teams, because I could go through a lot of things, making the playoffs with Marbury and getting smoked by the Nets was devastating
that was
because
rough. Yeah,
yeah, and also because I lived in Jersey and I didn't hate the Nets, but like just
right,
living in Jersey and all my friends being Nets fans, that was the
right.
first time we like butted heads.
Yeah.
And I don't think there's a rivalry there, but there is now.
Yeah, yeah, no, there's definitely animosity there. And on the Marbury team getting swept, I remember a lot of Knicks fans at that time feeling optimistic that like
Yeah,
they could win
I
that
was
series
one of
or at
them.
least or at least push that team to a 6 or 7 game series because of how well Steph was playing. He had just got traded over from Phoenix. He kind of changed the course of the season for the Knicks. Knicks snuck
Yeah,
into the playoffs. And that was, if I had to be honest, that was probably the beginning of my, I don't know if I'd call it hatred, but like that feeling of like dislike for the Nets probably began there. Like I know we can talk about Prokhorov and Jay-Z and the blueprint of success billboard that was outside of Madison Square Garden that they posted when they became owners of the Nets.
wow,
But to me, like the Nets, and then Richard Jefferson talked about it a bunch, and he carries it with him in his commentary today. Like the Nets had real disdain for the Knicks because of the attention they got, because it was New York City, and they were a team at that time that went to the NBA Finals 2 years in a row,
they were a
that were
great team.
a truly elite team in the NBA, and they took that like disrespect that they felt that they were having in the tri-state area and brought it to that series. You had the Kenyon Martin, Tim Thomas beef.
Yeah,
The Jason Kidd got into the face of Frank Williams in game one. Like they played with a level of intensity that I don't think that the Knicks clearly were not ready for. I mean, again, they got absolutely smoked in that
smoke.
series, but they kind of played with kind of a little bit of a chip and an edge that rubbed me the wrong way during that series. And Jason Kidd is one of my all-time favorite athletes. He's one of my
Same.
all-time favorite basketball players.
Yep.
But like that was the moment I was kind of like, I didn't like how they kind of did the Knicks in that
Oh,
series,
Keith.
especially because they knew that they could just double Steph every time they crossed half court, and then the other Knicks couldn't do anything. Like I was like, all right, guys, you had a great strategy, and you have a much more talented team. Like they're flexing like they were winning a championship.
Well, for me, if we talk about disdain, I don't really have disdain for the Nets anymore,
Right.
but it was when they traded for Paul Pierce and like the washed up Pierce and Garnett
Right.
teams where it was like two guys I couldn't stand, especially Paul Pierce. I could not stand because even when the Celtics were bad, he killed the Knicks. But yeah, that was for me. It was just devastating. If it wasn't for my friends, it wasn't necessarily the Nets. It was the fact that I grew up around Nets fans or Fugazi Net fans. And yes, I'm calling them out right now because they only watch when they're good. But that definitely hurt. I mean, I could have went down draft night trades that were just worse. Bargnani trade ripped my soul out. All that stuff. The drafts, we could go the drafts and the good picks they did make, they traded away, whether it was Ariza or Nene.
Ariza, yeah. The first guy I thought about was Ariza. That's the first one you went to. Yeah, there's plenty of those.
I forget he played for the team for a little bit.
He did. And he was good. And what was crazy about the Ariza era with the Knicks, which was one season, I don't even know if it was a full season, was that Larry Brown hated him. Larry Brown is like, that's funny, not to steal a thing from our good buddy Ryan Hickey, but like I do also think a lot about like topics or things on the shower. And I was thinking like, I would love to talk to Stephon Marbury on this podcast. And I don't know how Knicks fans would feel about it. I think they mostly would like it. But like, because I'd love to hear like what it was like playing for Larry Brown. Because he coached like a bozo from the outside. And I can't imagine like it was like better on the inside. But I would love to kind of know like, was there anything worthwhile about that Larry Brown experience? Because Larry Brown like hated rookies. And Larry Brown thought that Trevor Ariza, who's 19 years old, he's a freshman out of UCLA, left early, he was drafted by the Knicks in the second round, and flashed immediately. Great defense, amazing athlete. He wasn't a great shooter at that time, but a guy who clearly had talent, a guy who was clearly going to be an NBA player. And Larry Brown felt like he was entitled and wouldn't play him. And it was kind of the first contention with him and Isaiah Thomas at that time. And then eventually he convinced Isaiah Thomas to ship him out. It was like, and that was a guy that ended up being a championship role player for the Lakers.
He's like the Laker fans, and they love Trevor Ariza.
Right. They a lot of them didn't like when they let him walk, even though they got Ron Artest / Metta World Peace to come back in free agency at that point in time. Like, and the Knicks just gave him away.
Well, it's funny you bring up Larry Brown because I always think about it. The first Knicks game I ever went to was Larry Brown was the coach, but he wasn't on the bench. It was like second to last game. I remember they playing the Bucks. It was like Nate Robinson was the only guy in the Knicks that suited up that night.
Yeah.
And we got tickets, and each ticket, my dad had Larry Brown, I had Q Rich, my sister had a Marbury ticket. None of those guys were there. Or Q Rich was in street clothes.
Yeah.
And that was, I think the Marbury Isaiah Thomas stuff was going on, and he wasn't there. And Larry Brown just wasn't there. And also us being in the age group we were, I look at Larry Brown as the reason why he kind of stifled AI. So I also held that against him because that was my favorite player growing up.
Same.
Like I loved Larry Johnson, but when it meant like actual favorite player, like that was my guy.
Yeah, I don't know if there's ever, besides John Starks when I was super, super young, there's never been a Knick that's been my favorite player in the NBA.
Well, I to be fair, I loved Melo, so when we got him, that was the only time. But that was 21.
Yeah, and I told you this before, but Melo was my favorite player in the NBA before he became a Knick. Like he was for a long time. Like, I loved him coming out of Syracuse, and then his rookie year, I was Team Melo over LeBron all day from day one.
He got robbed with the Rookie of the Year. That was probably
he absolutely got robbed Rookie of the Year. But like he was like my guy. So the whole Melo, again, I kind of it kind of went to a point where I was like, I did not want him to be. I wanted him on the Knicks, but like it like clouded everything. Like because now you're invested in your team and how they win and how he's related to that winning, and it messed everything up. Like I feel like I in some ways, because the Knicks didn't win anything, I almost wish Melo was never a Knick, because otherwise I'd probably be his biggest fan. But because he was, I can say, well, I don't like how he didn't play defense enough, or I didn't like how he didn't come in free agency instead of demanding a trade. Like all those different things kind of cloud my love for Carmelo Anthony.
Well, there actually that whole team, to be honest, when we had Kidd, Rasheed Wallace, Melo, these were Kenyon Martin, Marcus can't be obviously second tenure, but these were guys I grew up like loving, especially guys like Rasheed Wallace and Kidd.
Yeah.
So
exactly.
I guess you could count that, but I mean like actual long tenured Knicks, not guys that played half a season or a full season with them.
You got Anthony Gallo with me from WFAN. Gallo, when you talk about the current state of the team's direction, how satisfied are you where they're at right now? You know, they just came off a season. You had a pretty successful playoff run. You make the playoffs as a fifth seed. You upset, I put in quotation marks, the Cavs, but you did upset them, beat them in 5 games. You go to the second round, you lose to the Miami Heat team, a team that was seeded 8th, but a team that did go to the NBA Finals.
Yeah.
Where do you see the Knicks now with the moves they made this offseason? You let Derrick Rose walk, you trade Obi Toppin, you bring in Dante DiVincenzo. Are you pleased with the direction of the team thus far?
I'd probably say 8 out of 10. And that's just because, like, if they got that next piece, that big piece, I probably would say 10 out of 10. But I haven't been this confident probably in my life at where they're headed. Obviously, when they had Melo, it was just like, this is it. This is the best we're going to get. We're probably never going to beat the Heat. Even if we were as good as anyone else in the NBA, we were never going to beat that Heat team. This feels like a team that can do damage, to steal a line from our coworker, Tommy Lugauer.
Loogie,
But
yeah.
I'm very confident. And even though the Heat went to the finals, but they were one possession away from forcing the game 7. I think that they don't get any credit for their moves. You know, you hear me on Twitter all the time. If other teams did what the Knicks are doing right now, they'd be nationally praised for the way that they've done it. But because it's the Knicks, they don't get it. The Obi Toppin trade, I hated the return, but I don't know what the market was for him. So that might have been the only market they had. And then you hear that there might have been a riff, which is unconfirmed. But so I can't blame him for that. So I'm very confident. I love the Dante move. I love the small pieces they've brought in on the bench. And there's not a team in a better position. If Dame Lillard didn't force his hand in Miami, there wouldn't be a team in a better position that's ready to win now, like the Knicks have when it comes to upgrading for that mega piece. You know, you could say the Thunder or the Rockets, but I don't think they're getting a major piece because of where they're at. So like the Knicks have the picks, they have flexible young assets, and they have a guy who, I mean, we'll get to it later, who I think is a superstar in Jalen Brunson.
Yeah. And it's funny when you talk about like where the Knicks are positioned, because in some ways it feels like because the next superstar that became available is a point guard, is the only reason why he's not a Knick. Like you feel like because of how they're positioned, what they've been able to build in terms of culture and team success, and that the next superstar that becomes available is going to be targeted by the Knicks, and Knicks will have a very good chance to get him. But because, as you mentioned, Jalen Brunson being what you deem a superstar, what I've deemed on this podcast as a superstar, is your point guard, and because he's undersized, it's like it's a good problem to have, but it kind of crosses off now superstar point guard that may become available on the trade market.
Well, also because of the kind of player Lillard was. I mean, he didn't want to come here, supposedly, reportedly. He only wants the Heat, maybe the Nets, but I don't think that's ever going to happen.
Yeah.
But that's the only reason why the Heat are in that position is because of the demand. Otherwise, if an Embiid becomes available, I'm not going to name certain guys that could become available because they're guys I don't want. But or like even in a pipe dream that a guy like Giannis becomes available, the Knicks are best positioned to get these guys, or Luka. And obviously we've seen Luka and Jalen Brunson coexist. So that's why I'm very confident. And I think that there's a lot of Knicks fans that are older than us that expect to be title contenders like they were in the 90s every year, and think that if you're not there yet, there's nothing to be excited about. And I'm the other way around, because I think that there's maybe if the league was one conference, there's maybe 6 teams that I would definitely say have a better chance at being a top echelon team than the Knicks. And it also depends on health. Like, the Bucks were unhealthy last year, so you never know what can happen in that aspect. So I'm very excited. I'm not always the biggest Tibbs cheerleader. I think he's done a great job, and he's not perfect, but he's been the best coach since Jeff Van Gundy's been here in my lifetime.
Interesting, because it's like that is.
And
true.
I love Mike Woodson.
Mike
Woodson's my favorite coach, but
Woodson would be the other guy. But it's hard. It's hard to argue against the success that Tibbs has had. And he's done it. You can't say he's done it with like a loaded roster. I think that in many ways this is a roster that has developed under his watch. So he's got to get credit for that. In some ways, I guess my frustration with Tibbs is I feel like for the good habits that he's created and the culture he has built, it's kind of like 2 steps forward, 2 steps back with some of his, stubborn, kind of stone-headed ways when it comes to rotations and
His
player
rotations
minutes.
is what kills me the most.
Yeah, and even like in-game strategy at times where it feels like he's coaching on autopilot. Like those games kill me. And I think some in some ways, because like the Tibbs thing is like a whole seeing the kid Tibbs conversation is very interesting. Because I feel like most older fans love Tibbs from what I see, or at least they think he's really good. And in part because like during a lot of their adult years, like they've seen terrible Knicks teams, and the Knicks team under Tibbs for the most part have been pretty good. And I feel like it's usually younger fans who tend to hate Tibbs.
Yeah.
I wonder if that's in part because younger fans kind of live and die with every game more so than older fans do.
Yes,
like
way more locked into
you're an
the
older
league in
fan,
general.
and this is a general speaking. Of course, there are older fans who, of course, watch every game and are following every game. But in general, you have older fans who they have kids, they have a full-time job, maybe they have 2 jobs. Maybe they're grandkids, maybe they take care of grandkids, like whatever the case may be. Like they have a lot of other priorities. Maybe they have side businesses that are really important. Like they have a lot of other things that are important beyond just following every single Knicks game. So I think they look at it from a lot more of a macro sense, which is kind of what you laid out. That look at his success, look at what he's done with this team. Like, how can you say he's a bad coach? Where someone like me, and look, I do a lot of stuff too, but I think there are a lot of people in our age group and in younger who, because they maybe aren't working full time, or because like Knicks basketball is their life. They don't have the biggest thing, they don't have a wife or a husband or whatever.
Yeah.
They don't have like a spouse to have to deal with. So like they are living and dying with every Knicks game, and they're seeing the mistakes Tibbs makes, not night in and night out, but often enough to where they're highly frustrated. And that to me always seems to be the disconnect.
Yeah, and to your point, he's not a very modern offensive coach. I think their upgrades on the coaching staff, guys like O'Brien and stuff like that, have helped.
Yeah.
I think what kills me, like that you can also throw in there that a younger fan might point out, is his in-game sets at like crunch time or in an inbounds
they're awful.
late in a game or bad. They got better last year. They did get better last year, but they weren't perfect. And I think that the older fan sees Tibbs as he was a part of those teams in the 90s.
They do. I know. And it annoys me so much.
Yeah.
Especially because I think, and I love, I've said what I've said about some of the Knick media members. Some of them I love, some of them I don't love, but they're,
we've had these conversations.
but they all work hard, and I respect all of them. But like, I think a lot of them are either worked during those eras, or at the very least, kind of, again, were adults during those eras and kind of have a very rose-colored look at that era, and therefore they don't hammer Tibbs the way they should. Like, I think they give him a lot of passes. You watch these press conferences, and they're not asking kind of just like basic, obvious questions with stuff he's doing in game, or they're accepting answers that are nonsensical. That always annoys me the most. Like, and I do think a lot of it is a residual from, well, Jeff Van Gundy always stands for this guy, no pun intended. And like, he was there when they were winning. Like, he was there when things were good, when we weren't being harassed by Knicks, Knicks PR. Like, he was there during the good old days. And like, I think they cling to that. And now they're winning. So now they say, look, not only that, he's also been a winning coach here, which so many other coaches that come here have not done. So I do think in many ways you're 100% right. They cling to his connections to those 90s Knicks, which is ironic because the Knicks know that, which is why every now and then they'll post like a picture of him standing on a sideline behind Van Gundy on their social media, because they know how much what feelings that elicits.
Yeah, and 2 things. One, like I root for 2 teams that hold on to an era of the Mets with the 80s Mets, the 86 Mets specifically, and older Knicks fans with the 90s. Like, I didn't experience that. The 90s Knicks didn't win anything. And I laugh when a lot of older fans have these high standards. Like, well, you guys never saw a championship. Like, you saw, and this is not to crap on John Starks, but whenever someone compares somebody to John Starks, I'm like, he also had the worst game in the biggest moment of his career. That, like, any other franchise in the city, if that happened to a player, we would not revere him the way he's revered.
I know.
The other
thing it's like if Philadelphia revered Mitch Williams.
Exactly, yes.
You know what I'm saying? Yeah. You'd be like, what is it is weird.
Yeah, and the other thing is too, when you look at this team, I do think I love this that he holds players accountable. I also think there's a hypocrisy in, like, when we talk about like a Julius Randle, he's clearly held accountable, and he tries, but he gets that lazy moniker a lot, sometimes justified. But like Tibbs is clearly pushing these guys. The other thing I wanted to point to, going back to what you were saying before, things that make me happy. You mentioned it, development. For the first time in my life, going back to as early as 98, like I'll just use 98 as the limit, like the line of demarcation for me.
Yeah.
Even from then, they've never developed talent. Like they didn't develop the Landry Fields of the worlds, the Wilson Chandlers, Gallinari, none of these guys. KP never got better as a Knick. And since Leon Rose has taken over and Tibbs has come in as coach, they've developed guys. We've seen Toppin didn't get much better, but IQ's gotten better.
Yeah.
RJ, even if it's small, he's gotten better each year. Julius Randle turned into an all NBA player under them. We've seen Mitch get better. Even if he doesn't like his role, we've seen him get better.
Yeah. Quentin Grimes.
And we don't even know what we're going to get from him this year. We've seen Jalen Brunson take a huge step. We saw guys like even the younger guys, the guys that don't matter, like a
Deuce McBride,
Deuce and Jericho. They've both grown. And for the first time in my life, I could actually say, but we cried for years for it, that they've done this right.
I totally agree with that. And now ESPN put forth their win projections for the Eastern Conference, and it places the Knicks a tick below where they finished last season. So the Knicks are projected to win 46 games this season, which is I think one game less than he had last season. ESPN did this by surveying 15 of its experts. So 46 wins would be good for 6 in the Eastern Conference. The teams ahead of the Knicks they have are the Celtics at 55 wins, the Bucks at 54 wins, Cavs at 50, Sixers at 47, and Heat also at 46. I don't know how they deciphered a tiebreaker between the Knicks and Heat for the 5th spot, but the Heat were listed 5th.
And the Heat got worse.
Yeah, in theory. I mean, we'll see. I don't know if they're counting for Dame Lillard, but I don't think you can if you're doing something like this, because I don't know if they're kind of Harden with the Sixers thing. So that is interesting how they figure this thing out. Then the Hawks, Nets, Pacers, and Magic rounded out the rest of the playing group of the top 10 teams in the East. Win total for you on 46, too high, too low, just right? What do you think?
I want to get hung up on the 6th place thing. I think it's. If I'm betting, I would probably bet the over on this, but I do think it's a fair number. The only thing I'll say this is, it is a game better. What is a game better or worse than last year? I forgot.
I believe. Let me double check. I thought it was a game worse, but let me just double check.
And they started very slow last year, and I do not expect this team to start slow. We're gonna get an RJ and Jalen and Josh.
Yeah, it's one game worse. Yeah, they won 47 last year.
So if you want to get hung up on that, they started very slow last year. And when they tightened up the rotations, they took off. So I do think we're going to see an informed Jalen Brunson, an informed RJ, because they're playing in the World Cup, and they're not going to need that warm-up phase. They're also still a very young team. So for them to come out hot, it would not be shocking to me. I think it's a fair win total. I get hung up on more the Heat and Cavs being ahead of them. And like, I can make an argument that the Sixers are going to get dramatically worse because we don't know what the residual effects of Harden, whether they trade him or what's going to happen and what that means for Embiid and that roster. So I think it's tough. I do think that we do not get the respect from media members. So it's another story for another day.
Yeah, for sure. It's funny. I've been kind of dipping my toe in the 50-win water for much of this offseason. And, we have plenty of time before we get to official predictions. But I think the 46 is fair. Like, in a lot of the over-unders I've seen for the Knicks, I've sat them kind of somewhere around 44, 45, 46 wins. I think that's a fair number. I agree. I would go over because of a lot of things you mentioned. I think that, RJ Barrett normally starts seasons terribly. He's like almost every season he's played with the Knicks, the first month or two of the season, he doesn't play well at all. And this season was no different this past season. Now that he's playing in the World Cup, he's playing really well for Canada in these exhibition games. I would expect that he's going to play a lot better to start the season. Again, Jalen Brunson, as you mentioned, he'll be more familiar. And overall, the Knicks have a lot of continuity. Like, a lot of these teams, or at least some of them, are working in either big pieces or they have some kind of chemistry issue they're trying to figure out. So the Celtics are working in KP. The Cavs brought in a bunch of role players, Max Strus, guys who are going to be now in their rotation. The Sixers, as you mentioned, have this Harden, whatever the thing's going to be, whether it's him showing up and just like blowing everything up in training camp, or it's him, getting traded. Now they got to work in new pieces from the trade, and a trade that I don't think will net them back a player as good as James Harden. The Heat could be ushering in a Dame Lillard situation. Who knows how many guys they lose in that kind of trade? So The Knicks, I think, will start the season really strong. I know their schedule is tough to kind of start, but if they kind of weather that early storm, I think the Knicks by New Year's Day could be a top 3 team in the East. Now, can they stay the course over the course of the 82 games? I think will be a question mark that we'll have to see. But I think the Knicks will have continuity on their side more so than a lot of these other teams that they're listed with. Also, a team like the Bucks is you got other teams that are older too. Like the Bucks are a very old team. They might be the old team in the NBA. So I'm not exactly sold that the Bucks are going to have this great regular season, especially because they saw last season that winning all those games in regular season didn't really mean much for them in the playoffs because they got bounced in the first round. So who knows where they finish in terms of playoffs? But like I think there's been a little bit of an underrating of how well Knicks could do in the regular season this year.
Yeah. And I think that the Heat, you could say the Heat are going to go farther than the Knicks, and that might not be wrong because, again, they were terrible up until the second play-in game.
Yeah.
And they turned it on.
Yeah, they were terrible until the fourth quarter of the second play-in game.
Bulls
but like, I still contend that if Billy Donovan didn't take out Kobe White and put in Pat Beverly in the last 4 minutes, that they would not have made the playoffs. Yeah, I still contend that. People who watched that game, Kobe White was on fire, and he was about to send Miami home. And then Billy Donovan inexplicably decided I needed Pat Beverly out there to guard Jimmy Butler. How is that going to work? He's 6'1". It didn't work out well.
And he's such an overrated defender.
Right.
And my thing is, too, with the Heat, like in the concept of like looking at them versus the Knicks, they lost Max Strus and they lost Gabe Vincent. You could talk about Jimmy Butler all you want. From game 2 of the semifinals on, those guys carried them to the finals. You know, Gabe Vincent got hurt against the Celtics, and until he came back, it looked like the Heat were going to blow that series. And this is not a knock on Jimmy Butler, but to think that Jimmy Butler and Bam, without 2 of their key pieces, are enough. Now, again, we don't know if the Lillard thing's going to happen before the season, if it's going to happen in the middle of the season.
Right.
That changes everything. And also, how healthy is Lillard? How healthy is Jimmy Butler going to be another year on those legs? What Bam are you going to get? I do think that if you're talking about ceiling, they probably have a higher ceiling than the Knicks. Yeah. And then with the Cavs, I think they did a really good job this offseason. But how much is what happened in the playoffs going to weigh on them? And what is there going to be growth for them? And then the Sixers, you don't know what you're getting. If they keep Harden, they might be one of the better teams in the Eastern Conference with a chance to contend. But it doesn't look like that's going to happen.
And it doesn't look like Harden who wants to play ball. To me, so much of what made Philly great last season was Harden was really invested in Joel Embiid's MVP case. Like he was, kept saying to the high hills that Joel Embiid win MVP. Like when he was announced that he won the award, Harden was all up in the videos, like Puffy, as Suge Knight would say. It was like he really was invested in that season. And I think he thought all the good deeds he would do would lead to a big contract, and then it didn't. So now he's going crazy. So we've seen, we're in New York, so we've actually seen up close what a James Harden that's unhappy, that's disengaged looks like, and what that can do to a team. The Nets lost 10 games in a row with him when he didn't care.
Yeah,
they could not win a game with James Harden and Kyrie Irving for half the time during that time period because of how much he was so fed up with the Nets and how badly he wanted to be traded. So I can't, even if they bring him back and he plays, I still think that they could take a major step down because he's been shown to be a guy that if he's not invested, he's not going to give his all.
And are we getting fat suit James Harden? I also think that if the Sixers if they were to be able to get the Clippers to give up a Terrence Mann and a Powell, they might still be a scary team with a healthy Embiid. Because I think Tyrese Maxey is one of the up and coming players in the league that doesn't get enough credit.
He's good.
When we talk about trade packages, if the Sixers were in on Lillard, I think Tyrese Maxey is a far greater piece than a Tyler Hero. And I think he's every bit as good as a piece as RJ Barrett. But that's a whole other story. I think that if they got the right pieces, they could be a very good team. Because we saw when Embiid and Harden were out, that Maxey, they played really well with just Maxey and Tobias Harris out there.
They did. Yeah, it's Philly in this Eastern Conference is the team that I think is probably has the most kind of unpredictability. Yeah. I feel like a lot of these teams, I'd be pretty set in saying that they'll be close to where they are in these standings. Mm-hmm. Philly is if somehow they were the number 1 seed, I'd be like, well, I mean, they had the reigning MVP. That wouldn't shock me. But if you told me they were outside of this top 6, I'd be like, no, that doesn't shock me. Embiid gets hurt a lot. There's a lot of turmoil, and they have a brand new coach. That's another thing. A lot of these teams are ushering new coaches. Bucks are ushering a new coach as well. So, like, I think the East is set up well for the Knicks to do a lot better than people expect. Is there any team of those 4 teams that were in that playing group that was the Hawks, Nets, Pacers, Magic? Any one of those teams would concern you as a team that maybe could usurp the Knicks in these standings?
I would say the Pacers just because they're young.
Mm.
They have a guy that people love, and I think Tyrese Halliburton's great. I think he's a little hollow in his stats.
Right.
The Hawks don't scare me. I think that Hawks team is one bad week away from imploding. The Nets are not. The Nets are going to be, I think if you're ranking those teams, I think the Nets are the 10th seed. And the Magic are not. The Magic are building it the right way, but they are not. I don't think they don't make me nervous. It's just Paolo on that team that's really looking like going to be a big. I love Franz. They have Jalen Suggs is going to come off the bench as like a backup to the backup maybe. So they are a little deeper, but I'd say the Pacers. I think the Pacers showed a lot of growth in the second half last year, and they get it. They get it to Halliburton. I don't think Obi Toppin's going to be a game changer, but he fits Halliburton very nicely. I would say them just because of what they did last year in building a nice little young core. And, Halliburton's, we've seen guys go to the Olympics and go to the FIBA World Cup and gain some great experience from being around other vets and talking to guys. So I think Halliburton is going to take another step. And I also think that he's still motivated by Wally's comments that seemed he kept that. It clearly bothered him, which, I can't even blame him for it.
Right.
So I think that's also another motivation. So I think that they also tend to be a little bit more, if you're looking at those 3 teams, the more stable of the franchises. Like they've been there before. They know how to build a roster. It's like the 3rd time in my lifetime they've rebuilt the roster and done it in a good way. So they scare me the most. I'm not going to say that any of these teams actually scare me, but if there was one I was going to pick, it'd be the Pacers.
Yeah, I agree. I don't think any of these teams would usurp the Knicks in the standings. If I had to pick one, as much as it pains me, I'd probably say the Hawks. And the only reason why I mentioned the Hawks is because of Quinn Snyder. Because I love Quinn Snyder. I think that he is one of the best coaches in the NBA. I think he got kind of too much. I guess it's not like people care about Utah, but I think he kind of got a lot of heat for how Utah with number 1 seed didn't get to a conference finals. But that was a team that when Gordon Hayward left, people thought Utah was just going to go into the tank. They thought it was going to go into they were going to be a complete nothing. And he had the foresight to see a rookie Donovan Mitchell and say, I'm just going to build my team that was built around Gordon Hayward around this 21-year-old rookie. And a lot of people would not have done that. Who was the guy who was not even a top 10 pick. And look at what they built in Utah. He runs one of the best offensive systems. His teams always play together. And to me, if they don't succeed, I think it's gonna be because of Trae Young. It's gonna be because Trae Young is too stubborn. He wants to play his own way. He's not buying in. I will not blame the coach unless there's obvious reasons too. But I think it's gonna be his fault alone, basically. If Trae Young buys in, and if DeJounte Murray buys in, they got rid of a guy who may have been a locker room cancer in John Collins. There was this.
How much of that was Trae Young?
It was right, and how much it was maybe Trae Young's fault, but it was this 4 or 5 year song and dance of whether or not they're going to trade John Collins. I can't believe how long it took. Ironically, he got traded to the Utah Jazz, but maybe getting him out of there, getting a guy in Johnson who I actually loved coming out of the draft out of Duke, and I think may be a bigger, higher ceiling guy than John Collins. Maybe they figure things out, and if the Knicks end up being the Knicks end up being around 46 to 44 wins, could the Hawks get back up to that 46-44 range? That's, I think, their best case scenario. So that's why I would lean Hawks if I'd say one team. I don't think any of these teams do, but that would be a team I'd pick.
I can't. I'm kind of I like what they did. I just think that what happened last year is still there, and you said, it's probably because of Trae Young, and he's an amazing player. I mean, we watched what he did in the playoffs. He's rode that for 2 years now.
I know. Yeah, trust me, we haven't forgotten. He won't let us forget.
Yeah, and then just to throw it out there, when Mitch Robinson's healthy, the Hawks don't do anything against the Knicks.
They don't win. They never beat the Knicks.
Clint Capella would not have been owning the boards against an old Taj Gibson the whole series. But that's in the past. It's a long time ago. It's a new era. But no, I love the Quinn Snyder hire. I just don't know how much. If Trae is not bought in, that could be a half a season and that team could crumble. I do love Dejounte Murray. I think he's their best player. Trae Young, one of the best scorers in the league. He's very limited elsewhere though. So I liked the Murray move last year, but that was also what John Collins and him could do together. And now that he's gone, and I thought they had to trade him because you're not going to get rid of Trae at this point, especially after what he did 2 years ago.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see where the Knicks end up shaking out in this Eastern Conference that's shuffled some of the deck with some of these players that will continue to shuffle. Again, if Dame Lillard enters the conference, maybe Harden leaves the conference, it'll be interesting to follow. So finally, we record this podcast on 8/24, a day that has now become known as Kobe Bryant Day in the basketball community. August 23rd would have been Kobe Bryant's 45th birthday. The Basketball Hall of Famer and 5-time NBA champion, of course, was tragically lost in a helicopter crash in 2020. So the Laker legend has talked plenty about his love for New York City and Madison Square Garden. He set the MSG scoring record in 2009 when he scored 61 points. That was, of course, later passed by Carmelo Anthony in 2014. He also made his All-Star Game debut at Madison Square Garden in 1998. He's been regularly, showered with MVP chants when the Lakers would visit Madison Square Garden. And after his career, Kobe said that if there was one team he could ever play for besides the Lakers, it would be the Knicks. I even saw a headline when I was doing research today that when they thought he thought he may be at risk of being cut or amnestied late in his career, that he thought he would sign with the Knicks if that had come to pass. So your most memorable Kobe Bryant Knicks adjacent moment. It doesn't have to be Kobe Bryant winning a game, even with the Knicks. It could just be anything involving the Knicks. What is your most memorable moment when it comes to Kobe and the Knicks?
I would say it's got to be, and I'm sorry, it's got to be the Chris Childs moment. It was.
I did not think you were going there.
Yeah, it's got, because to be honest, I ended up, Chris Childs was a good basketball player. He was not great, but it made me think that Chris Childs was this amazing player as a kid. I was like, oh, look, the best player in maybe the world at the time. He's not backing down from, and that was like right as Kobe was breaking out. I think if we're taking a more positive outlook, it's when he dropped that 60 points on the Knicks, they were in the process of just getting ready for that summer. So I was so okay with whatever happened to them. I didn't care if they won. I watched so many games, but I was just like, whatever, LeBron, Wade, whatever we're going to get, the summer's what matters. So at that point, I watched it almost as a casual. The 98 All-Star game, I don't remember much. Again, that year was really my first basketball memory, but a lot of my memories are late April into the playoffs than it is that actual season. Again, the strike and everything. So as a kid, I'm sure that affected what happened to me. Or I'm not even sure if that was the same season as the strike.
Yeah, no, 99 was the strike. So it was 98 into 99.
So then I don't even remember any of that season then. So 98, 99 is really my first year of like really remembering things. So that game he was it was also it was the start of a long string of guys coming to the Garden and playing their brain. Like that Kobe game is when I think of as like the first time superstars, or sometimes not superstars, would come to the Garden and play their best game.
I'm pretty sure LeBron had like a 50-point triple-double that same season, I think.
Yeah.
Or I think they may have rescinded it with triple-double because they thought like one of them wasn't a rebound or assist. But yeah, that season was like, it was weird because it was a rough season in the sense that, you knew it was going to be a lot of losses. And it started off really good because Zach Randolph and Jamal Crawford played great. And the Knicks were like, well, we're trying to clear cap space. So get these guys out of here. So they just shipped them away.
When Jamal was gone, that was it. My belief. Yeah. Like, I was like, all right,
I was so mad because Jamal Crawford is one of my all-time favorite Knicks. So to lose him, even though I knew what the plan was still hurtful. So funny you mentioned Chris Childs. I've been thinking about all of the Laker moments since Kobe came into the league. And I don't, for some reason, I don't even think of that as like a Knicks moment. But of course it is. Chris Childs is like a important part of that like late 90s, early 2000s team. And yeah, that fight was, at that time would have went viral if it was today. I mean, him two-piecing Kobe like that was crazy. So that's a good one for sure. The 61 points, of course, the surgical precision of that performance was just probably the one that stood out the most. Pau Gasol, by the way, also had like
teaming him the whole game.
Pau Gasol also had 31 points in the game. Like they combined for like 92 points. It was a stellar two-man performance. But that was a Knicks team with Mike D'Antoni that played zero defense at all. I saw Al Harrington, they recently did a podcast where he was like, the players basically had to beg Mike D'Antoni to let them come in early to do defensive practice. Yeah, even though he wouldn't let him. That's how much he did not care about defense. So Kobe came in wanting to prove a point. I think he wanted to have fun with Spike Lee. Spike Lee did the Kobe doing work documentary that same season, and they were doing press for that movie during that trip to Madison Square Garden, and he told Spike, "Hey, watch what I'm gonna do out here," and then he went and dropped 61. I think for me, so one of the things I think about is Jeremy Lin, the Jeremy Lin game. Kobe Bryant saying,
right.
I don't know who this kid is or whatever," and then Lin drops like 38 or whatever, and that to me was like the absolute height of Linsanity. Like, if there was any kind of non-believers at that point in time or people who were not paying attention, everyone knew who he was after that game. It was nationally televised.
Yep.
Anytime the Lakers come to Madison Garden, it's a big deal, especially during that era, during the Kobe era. So that moment, that game is big. I also think, and it's one that kind of gets forgotten about, and I kind of hate it. I think it gets forgotten about because it was not at Madison Square Garden. But Allen Houston scoring 53 points against Kobe Bryant at the Staples Center. I think this was maybe 2002, 2003, I want to say. They beat the Lakers 117-110. This was 2003. It's Allen Houston's best game as a Knick. And it was a 10 o'clock, 10:30 start. Like a lot of people forget about it. Knicks were not good.
That's probably why I don't even remember that.
Right. Knicks were not good this season. They were, I think I saw the right, they were 23 and 28 at the time. They were not going to make the playoffs. But Houston was having a great year the whole season. And Shaq was hurt. So it was a Kobe versus Allen Houston matchup. And Allen Houston just took it to Kobe. Now Kobe at 40. It's a great one-on-one duel between two of the elite shooting guards at that time. But like I remember like watching that game, not at live. I watched it like the Knicks 60 probably the day after or whatever. I think it was like a Friday night game. So I think I saw it on Saturday. And then it was like crazy to see like a player kind of in one game match Kobe's intensity, match his efficiency, match his skill set. Like that to me is one I always think about that gets forgotten about. So I want to make sure I mention that one as well. And finally, I always say the 98 All-Star game is like, that's like the beginning of like my basketball childhood. Like it's Jordan's retiring. It's, this 19-year-old second-year player that's being voted into the All-Star game, that's being hailed as the next Michael Jordan, that's going to be up against Michael Jordan in an All-Star game that's being played in my city. I love the NBA. I loved all the stars of the NBA. So the All-Star game was the biggest deal to me as like a 7-year-old kid. So like, and I, as you know, I wear the 1998 NBA All-Star game hat all the time. It's one of my favorite pieces of memorabilia or, apparel that I have. So one of those three would be the ones I think about, or four, I guess, if you include the 61-point game would be one of those for me. But Kobe, I love how much he respected like Madison Square Garden, respected kind of New York City as the mecca of basketball, how much love he showed.
Yeah, and I think that the other funny thing about anytime I see Kobe going off against a D'Antoni-led team is how much he grew up idolizing D'Antoni in Italy.
I know, yeah,
it's so funny to me. But the other thing is too, he had a respect for the game in general. So
right,
and when people who respect the game see the Garden as what it is. I know a lot of people like to crap on it now because the Knicks were irrelevant for so long, but there's a reason why players get up for it. The other thing is with the Chris Childs moment, it just sticks with me because one, those teams were so much of my childhood, so much of my early fandom. Like those early 2000 Mets or like any of the teams I grew up watching, they might not have been great, but they were teams that I grew up. And the best Knicks jerseys with me, the black stripe down the side.
Oh, you love those.
I do. Yeah. I told you this before. I look for those shorts every year, and I can never find them for a reasonable price.
I did not love those uniforms. I always tell you that. I did not. I thought the road ones I liked more. The home one, I was so ready when they moved on to the new ones. So I do think they're due for an upgrade, though.
Yeah,
I think I would love for them to do something inspired by those same uniforms for their next major uniform.
Yeah, and I see a lot of people always give me the same response. It was just that they had the one good year in those uniforms, and then it kind of was downhill, or a couple good years. So everyone always associates those uniforms with like not winning. Same thing with the logo. This circle logo with like I forgot what it was. It's like the pendant logo.
Oh, am I wearing? Not
no,
one,
not
right?
Not that one.
No,
the one from like the early 2000s.
Oh yeah.
They like
with the triangle. The great triangle and New York, yeah. I know you're talking about the circle with the NYK.
Yes,
I know. Yeah, that's
a lot of people hate that logo not because of the way it looks, but because of what it accompanied was such irrelevant teams.
Yeah, that was a very, very dark period. Well, um, thank you so much, Anthony Gallo, WFAN, for coming on the podcast. Let the people know where they could find you. I know you got a show coming up this weekend, so make sure you shout
Yes.
that out and let people know where they can find you on social media.
Yeah, I'm at on the screen. That's my Twitter is at Pico de Gallo, Pico Day _Gallo. My Instagram is Pico de Gallo 24, all one word. And then actually, yeah, my first solo shift this Sunday, 4 a.m. Sunday the 27th, 4 a.m. to 7 a.m. I'm hoping. I wish it was a little later. I'm not complaining because I would love to talk about the Knicks and just spew Knicks positivity to a bunch of people who don't want to be positive about the Knicks. But I'll try and squeeze it in a little bit because I have some fellow Knicks fans running the board that night.
Awesome. Well, make sure you guys check out Gallo, not just on social media, but also his show this weekend. And thank you guys all for checking out this episode of Orange and Blue Bloods, a New York Knicks podcast, Audacy WFAN original. It's a podcast you get wherever you get podcasts, including the free Audacy app. Make sure you hit the auto download feature on your streaming service to get these episodes every time we drop. We drop twice a week during the off season, so make sure you guys are checking us out on all audio platforms. Also, make sure you check us out on YouTube. You can find us on the WFAN page. You can follow me, EJ_Stewart on Twitter, Action EJ on Instagram, TikTok, and also Threads. That'll do it for now. Thank you guys so much for checking us out. For Anthony, I'm EJ. Take it easy, guys. Peace. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please don't forget to give it a thumbs up and subscribe to our channel for more content like this. If you want to see more of our videos, be sure to check out our playlist and let us know what you think in the comments below.
Also, don't forget to follow us on social media to stay up to date on our latest podcast ventures. Links will be in the descriptions. And as always, thanks for watching, and we will see you in our next video.